Amen. Well, do you guys like doing any type of puzzles or mazes or any type of games like that or anything? No, there's like a lot of things. But what about those, those pictures where, I always forget the names of it. Is it like 3D image posters or whatever where you stare at them for a long time until your eyes are messed up and you're supposed to see a picture, coming out? Is there anybody, I know I've asked this before, but it's different crowds sometimes. Is anybody that just never can see those when you look at those posters? Like, yeah, there's a couple of you guys.
I've been trying since I was like 4.
We'll lay hands on y'all. We'll lay hands and God, let them see the image. Those are hard. I know sometimes like you just want to, maybe it's just y'all too, like you want to punch those things before you can even see those puppies, whatever, frolicking in the wilderness or whatever it is. Like you just don't see those. And that's hard, seeing those. Well, I was thinking about, that's what I brought this for, if y'all are wondering, to say, why do you have a game up there? It's not like I get bored of my own sermon and I'm like, I'm going to play a game because they're not responding or whatever. No, I got this game one time. This has been a while. It was at a Christmas, like is it Dirty Santa, where you steal the prizes from everybody, as it goes around. Well, I got this. Yeah, there's like 10 different names for the same thing or whatever. This had like a $20 bill in it. So I was like, I want that. And if I can't figure it out, I'm just going to bust it. They're going to get that money. This can't be worth $20. But you go through it, and it's just a marble, and it's a maze, and you got to go around all these different places, and then finally you get to this slot, and you slide it over, and it like opens up. And I've messed it up so many times. This pops open. I've messed it where I had my finger there wrong, and I put it out. I'm like, I finally got it, and it's popping out my fingers there, and it pushes it back in, and you got to start all over. That's one of those games that I've done. I hate it. But if you're one of those people, one of those two people, or probably some of us, that games and puzzles sometimes just frustrate you, I was thinking about that with the Bible, in a way. As we're looking at this big book, this spans a whole lot of time. The Old Testament, the New Testament. And what I want to talk about, as we're going through this series, Jesus is Greater, what I want to start here really from the beginning is I want you to see that this is a unified whole. This whole Bible, everything in here, Old Testament to the New Testament, it all works together. It's not as if God was doing something before, and I've talked about this before in other messages. It's not as if God was back over here doing something, and the Old Testament was like a failed system, was like, I really should have planned that one out better. I should have thought about that. Hold up, I'm God, I can redo all this. It's not as if God was doing that and he messed up, and the Old Testament is just something we can read, like history. Let's don't do that, because here's the real one. It's a unified whole, and I want us to see that, how it all works together. And I want us to see about that. Speaking of this time of year, the greatest time of year, I think Christmas is awesome. That gets more play, really, because just the prizes and different things we do, the decorations and all that. But you talk about Easter, this is the event that if this didn't happen, then I've said before, what we're doing here is you guys are just coming to hear me talk. I mean, it's pointless if Easter didn't happen. If Jesus didn't rise from the grave, then this message, Paul even said in 1 Corinthians 15, it's like, we're to be pitied most of anybody, because this doesn't really matter. But he did rise from the grave. This is the greatest time of year. This is what it's all about. And so I want to talk about that with the Old Testament, the New Testament, this whole Bible, like it's just all a unified whole. And it's because of Jesus. Jesus is a linking thing in there through the whole thing that brings it all together, that I want us to really understand about that. And it makes sense if we really understand who he is, what he did, why that's important, and we're going to see that from the Old Testament to the New, and that he just is greater. That's the overarching theme of this whole thing, is that Jesus is greater than anything. So here's what I want to do. I'll put this first thing up here. If it not for the Old Testament, it would seem like Jesus started a new religion. That kind of goes with what I'm thinking about here. If you don't understand the Old Testament, the New Testament, how it all works together, it would almost seem that way. If you don't understand how it works together, it would seem like Jesus just came in and said, you know what, it was all messed up. I'm going to start something completely new here. Forget about all that. It would almost seem like he's starting something new there, but that's not the case there. And so I want us to get this, that it's just all a whole message that works together. In fact, I'll mainly be in the book of Hebrews today. And I encourage you guys, read this on your own. This whole book, what I'm going to do in the next few weeks is just kind of scratch the surface of it. But it's quickly becoming one of my favorite books, Hebrews. I heard somebody call this the book of Hebrews like a decoder ring, really, for the Old Testament and bringing in the New Testament and what Jesus did. It was like a decoder ring because you can understand more of what was happening in the Old Testament and why God set up all that the way that he did and what he was pointing to in the New Testament with Jesus. So we're going to be looking at that. Hebrews just quickly becoming one of my favorite books of the Bible. But I don't want to talk about this. Here's the first thing. I want to bring you guys through Hebrews, and I'm going to be mainly in chapter 7 today, but just in the very beginning, you see where the writer of Hebrews is taking us. He's kind of helping us see about Jesus in this theme that we're talking about, Jesus being greater. Just in Hebrews chapter 1, we're going to see Jesus is greater than the angels. In fact, I put that up here on the screen. Jesus is greater than the angels. In case you didn't know that, in case you were wondering about that. But he's going to be building this case, and today will be a little bit of teaching. You know, some maybe will like that more. But as I'm going to go through this, we're going to come to the end. I'll simplify really what we're talking about here. And I just want you to understand, like, this is exciting, really, what we're talking about here with Jesus and what it means and how God was showing us through some of these characters in the Old Testament. And then ultimately, what it was all pointing to, what Jesus did. And so that's really what this is about. So Jesus is greater than the angels. That's where he starts off with there in chapter 1. In fact, I'll read a few of those verses just to kind of let you see where he's going. Hebrews 1, 1 through 3. It says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. Pretty important what all he did there. The Son, and just think about what he says here. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. I mean, it's amazing what he's talking about there. Just Jesus. In case you're just wondering of Jesus, like if you just picture our kids, like I've never had anybody look at Alyssa and say, she is the exact representation of your being. Most people are like, I don't even see it. I mean, are you sure she's your kid? And I'm like, what are you saying? You know, like, well, what are you talking about there? I'm not going to get a test or anything. She's my kid. But he says he's the exact representation of his being. And so he's talking about the angels, and he's saying they're grand and glorious. You see them in so many ways. They're not the same as what we see on TV. Maybe if I point everything in a lot of ways back to TV, and which is it just makes for good illustrations, but it's not good theology. I point everything back to it. If you get your theology and picture of angels from on TV, it's going to be lacking in a lot of ways. I think about all the movies that are coming out, like the Steve Buscemi movie that's coming out where he's God and he's like going to mess everything up. Probably nobody here has an idea what it. He's going to like redo everything, and the angel's like, oh, we got to step in here before God messes us up, I think is the premise or something. And I'm like, what? What is this all about? Or The Good Place, you know, when you think about the angels there, it's just, we have this majorly flawed picture of how it is. When you look in the Old Testament, you see some of these people when they were approached by angels, not angles. It was, see, I'm imperfect. I do that for you guys. When they approached them, it was not this, hey man, this is an angel, like let's be friends. It was more of like wet your pants type of fear. It was like when they see these angels, it was, this is different. This is something amazing. This is out of this world type of experience when they would see them. It was something that was amazing when they saw them. And yet he goes in there in this picture of them and how great they are. I think is what he's trying to say. Like maybe in this time, maybe the Jews, when he's writing to, they understood this. He's saying, okay, you see how they are. You know how our ancestors interacted, what they saw, what they did when they were in their presence. And he's saying, but Jesus is greater. So you know how big they are. Amen, right on time. But Jesus is greater. We worked that out earlier. Jesus is greater. That's what he's pointing out there. So he's building up this case. Even when you would see angels sometimes, some people would go to them and they would see them and they didn't know what to do. There were times when Peter and John were like, oh, we see Jesus in all of his glory. We see Moses and Elijah in this picture, and they didn't know what to do. And then there was other times when people were in the presence of angels and they wanted to worship them. And there were angels that were like, wait, no. Worship is not for me. Worship is for God. And it even goes on here later on, it says in verse 6, I don't have it up here, but it says, and the angels are going to worship Jesus. So I hope you're seeing the very clear picture there. Jesus is greater. He's greater than the angels. Here's the next thing here, as he's going through this kind of systematic theology here, building this case for Jesus. Jesus is greater than Moses, this was a big one for the Jews in that time. Jesus is greater than Moses. And I would even add in there a clarification. He's greater than all the prophets, of which Moses was the greatest. He's greater than the prophets. He's greater than Moses. And like I said, this is a big thing here. Let me read this. I jumped up a few chapters. Hebrews 3, 1 through 6, talking about Jesus being greater than Moses. He said, therefore, holy brothers and sisters who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and high priest. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as a son over God's house. And we are his house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and hope which we glory. Jesus is greater than Moses. And that's what he was saying. And you think about this. There was a time when, you think about Moses, you think about this picture with everybody and how they're seeing Moses and how he's coming in there saying, okay, Jesus is greater. Think about some of the things that Moses did. That the law was given to him. He goes up on this mountain. If you think about this experience, and he's there, and he's literally like glowing. You know, he had to cover himself when he goes down to the people because of this glow when the people saw this. That's amazing. This isn't how we say to each other, like, there's something about you, you're just glowing. You're like, oh, I'm in love. You know, like just jumping around. That's what it is. It's the love glow. I see this. I've never seen that. I don't see the love glow in somebody. Or someone who's pregnant. I know as a guy, I'm never going to say anything or even ask if someone's pregnant. I just don't do that. But sometimes they say, you're glowing. And it's like, well, I'm pregnant. I have a human being inside of me. That's probably why there's a glow or something you see. It's not that. It's this, there was this glow about him that was different when he was there in the presence of God. You may be close to God, but are you glowing face close to God, in that way? That's a different type of experience there. And so this is Moses. This is the one who had this relationship with God, who brought the law, who led the people out of Egypt, who did all this stuff and had this such close relationship with him. And the people were so connected to him. The people so looked to him. The law was under him. This is the one they looked at as their leader in so many ways. And again, he's making this case saying, but Jesus is greater. Jesus is greater even than Moses. I don't think to us, maybe it's easy for me. Maybe you're like, move on, Kyle. We really get this. I don't think we understand the magnitude of really that statement of what he's saying. They understood it more when he's saying this. Guys, Jesus is greater than Moses. Okay, the angel's saying, hey, yeah, we get, but now he's greater than Moses, and he's going even further there. And I would say this, Jesus is greater than the priesthood. Let me go into the next chapter here, Hebrews chapter 4, as he's building this case, talking about Jesus. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. I'm not really going to get into all that stuff here today, but I just want to talk about him being this priest. He's been tempted in every way as we are, yet he didn't sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You know what the priest did, just I guess in a general way, we can talk about them. They interceded for the people. They went to the tabernacle. They went there to be in the presence of God. They go to the Holy of Holies. They would intercede for people. They made sacrifices. They were a specific people from a specific tribe, from the tribe of Levi, from the line of Aaron, from the line of Levi. And they went there and interceded for the people, made these sacrifices. And they did this. So he's comparing this. He's talking about what the priest did and how this is different. And here's the thing. I know we've talked about this before in other ways, but according to history, what they would do sometimes, I know this is that interesting thing, but according to history, they would say that they would either tie a rope to their leg or around their waist and maybe have some bells on it, because this is the seriousness of it that I want us to think about. this was always the way God intended it. And he had a tabernacle, a temporary tabernacle that was on the earth. And there was this specific room in there, the Holy of Holies, where God's presence, his spirit, where he would meet, in that place. Not like he's sitting in there in a chair watching TV, but his presence was in there. It's different now. This is how it was in that time. And so we can't just go in there. Anybody couldn't just go into this Holy of Holies. It wasn't just like one of those, like, I'm going to make this pilgrimage and I'm going to go into this special Holy of Holy rooms. This was only for the high priest who could do this, who had done the sacrifices, who was in the right relationship with God to be able to do this. And the reason they would say they would tie ropes around him or around their waist, if you don't know that, is because if he wasn't right with God at that time and he just went in there, they would just die. That's how serious it was. They would just die. Not like, you go in there and it's like, hey, you messed up. We're gonna bring you down a notch. We're gonna dock your pay or whatever. Not in that way. No, you would just die. This is the seriousness of being in the presence of God. And that's why they would do that. So with this rope, what they would say is like, so that it hasn't been like a long time, like they're sitting there like it's been like 2 days. Like, I think he should be done by now. Why don't you go check it out? Why don't you check it out? So they had this rope. So if it was that way, if they maybe even heard the bells ring, hit the ground, it was like either he accidentally tripped or he just fell dead. And so they would know and they would pull him out of there because they couldn't go in there. That was the point of it. That's kind of what, according to tradition, that they said that they would pull him out of there. The seriousness of it is, so this is the priest. This is the high priest at this time. I want us to really kind of understand how that was. And now I want to kind of draw this up to this guy in the Old Testament who's kind of a well-known figure. He doesn't have a big section in the Old Testament. It's just in Genesis 14. I won't read that in there, but just in Genesis 14, this guy named Melchizedek, he just shows up out of nowhere, this high priest. And let me just kind of tell you the story of Genesis 14. Okay, there were these 4 kings and these 5 kings, and these 4 kings are in battle with these 5 kings. And the 4 kings win. Evil kings, they won. And Abraham, the father of faith, important figure in the Old Testament, Abraham finds out that his nephew Lot was actually in one of these places that got taken over, and now he's in custody, taken into prison from one of these kings. And so he takes 318 of his guys. That's what it says, 318 of his guys, trained men, born in his household, big household, you think about all that, born there, trained men, and they go and they attack these guys. Maybe this isn't the story we always think about with Abraham, but he goes with 318 guys, and they take on these kings. They defeat them. It says they routed them, gets Lot back, gets all his stuff back, and he's leaving there. And then it just talks about Melchizedek just showing up on the scene. It's a mysterious figure, and I'll talk about him. Like, I think it's important to understand who he is, why he's put in there. I think it's intended that we just have this small little picture about him. It's mysterious. We don't understand everything about him. But he comes up on the scene. He blesses Abraham. Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything. This is a crazy thing for this guy, this king of righteousness is what his name means. Let me read Hebrews chapter 7 now, because this is where it gives us a little bit more of a picture. This is referring back to Genesis. Hebrews 7, 1 through 3. All this is going to make sense. I just want us to understand the greatness of Jesus, okay? He says, this Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. I think that's important. Resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Now there's what we call in the Old Testament, in fact, write this down, Melchizedek was a type of Christ. There's what we call, there were certain people that we call types of Christ. Now, before you think, like, if you haven't ever heard that, types of Christ, I'm not starting some weird cult here saying there was a bunch of Jesuses and you're like, I should have stayed out. I knew the rain was telling me not to go. This isn't talking about there were more Jesuses or they had the ability. When we talk about them being types of Christ, it's like their life and what they did and how God used them pointed to Jesus in some way. In some way that they were used, they were pointing to Jesus. And so Melchizedek was just a really clear picture of pointing to Jesus. He was a type of Christ, is how they call that. He's just, you see him. We don't see his lineage. I believe he was a person. There's sometimes who believe this was Jesus back then, but I don't believe that. I think he's a person that says he's resembling the Son of God. He was a priest. He's pointing to Jesus. He was this king in just his life. And here's some other cool things about him. Again, this will all kind of make sense as I'm bringing this all around. The cool things about him is like Abraham he's being blessed and he's giving him a tenth is what they would do many times to the high priest. This is before the Old Testament law came. That's important to remember. This is before the law. This is before Moses. This is before Aaron and the priesthood and all that happened. This is before Levi from the priest came from a certain tribe. This guy was not from that. So it's pointing to Jesus saying, later we're going to see Jesus is in the order of Melchizedek. He's not from the tribe of Levi as a high priest. So it's different. It's just a mysterious guy that really kind of came on the scene. In fact, I'll read this. I don't have this up on the screen, but you can look if you're following along with me in verses 9 and 10. Speaking about this guy, it says, one might even say that Levi, remember, Levi is later on, past Abraham, in his line there, who the priest came through this tribe, okay? So you would think about, you paid tithes to the priest. So this is before the Old Testament system. If you're following along with me still, if you haven't gone to sleep. And I'll do a lot of this. I don't know if that helps you if I make an arc. I don't know, but I'll do that probably. Verses 9 and 10, it says, one might even say Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, and there's my heart there, through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. I think we understand how all that works. Like he's, right, I don't really explain. No, as a kid, ask your mom. He's not even born yet. And this is later on. So I think that's kind of cool what he's saying there, that it's like he's paying the tithe through Abraham. This is before the law. And he's pointing out about who Melchizedek was and how he's pointing to Jesus and that Jesus is greater. He's greater than the priesthood. He's greater than these high priests. By the way, let me say this now. There are no more priests like this. There's no more priests that are in this same order. There's no more, we don't have to go to them. Jesus is the once for all finalized high priest. He's done it all. We don't need that. I just, if you're wondering, I don't know if you're new in that, I'm not a priest. I'm not in that way. It's different. Even like I said, priests today that call themselves priests are not the same in this order. Jesus is the once for all. The priesthood was temporary. Just like so much back then, it was temporary. And it was all temporary. It was planned. God knew all this. And it was always pointing to Jesus. It was always pointing, I want to show you how this works. And we're going to point ahead to Jesus. And Jesus became that once for all final high priest. There's no more after him. He's done it all. He's the eternal. He's finished all of that. I want us to understand that. So then Hebrews 7, 18 through 22. Speaking of that, the former regulation is set aside because it's weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced, by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without any oath, but he became a priest without an oath when God said to him, just based on God, he said, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. The guarantor of a better covenant. All of it was always pointing ahead to Jesus as something better. That's the whole point of it. In fact, write this down. Jesus brings a guarantee with him. He brings that guarantee with him. It's not something like, I'm going to give you a type of how this is going to be. I'm going to give you a picture of what it's going to be like. He's the guarantee. He brings that guarantee with him. Or I could say it this way. Jesus completely saves. He completely saves. It's not temporary. It's not looking ahead. It's like he's done this all. All of this was pointing towards him so we could see that, so we could get this picture painted. That's the way I see it there. I was thinking about this week. And all of it, in the Old Testament, I mentioned before that this is all a unified whole, and it's not separate pieces. If you're one of those people this is how it was when I first got into the Bible. I was like, man, I see some of these stories, some of these make sense, but then you bring in this other story and just, this is all over the place. There's no way this is a unified whole. There's no way this story that you're talking about, or this person, or what they're doing there, makes sense with what all was going here. But it is, when we understand this whole picture and how Jesus works into it, and he's always been the picture in there. It's always been pointing to him. So all of this whole system was intended for a purpose. It was always temporary, and it was always pointing ahead to something greater, which was Jesus, which was what he did. He was the once for all high priest through it all. That picture was painted there. Jesus became the eternal high priest who didn't just enter a temporary tabernacle into a temporary holy of holy rooms. No, he entered the true tabernacle with God. He entered the true holy of holies. He was there in God. It's totally different. It wasn't just people now going into this room. Now he's completely done it. He's completely finished it. In fact, in John 19:30, again, I don't have this up there, but it talks about it is finished. You know, you see Jesus when he was on the cross and what he did there. It says it is finished. It's paid in full. It's that word in Greek, tetelestai, which just means it's like a receipt, like it's paid in full, like maybe even going to court. It's like this debt has been paid in full. Tetelestai is what he was saying to us when he went there on the cross. When he did that, in that moment, so it's all been completely paid for. So everything we've done, it's like he's paid for that. When we put our faith in him, when we put our faith and trust in him, it's like this stamp has been put on us, which is interesting that it talks about the Holy Spirit being this kind of stamp, and this he comes into our life as this deposit guaranteeing our inheritance into heaven. So it's like we've been stamped with this paid in full stamp on top of us. You put your faith in Christ. That's what's cool about this. We're not trusting in some imperfect person like us, even though they've been chosen by God to be this high priest. We're trusting in the high priest, the once for all eternal high priest. And he went to the cross for us. He didn't take an animal, but he went there himself, and he entered the Holy of Holies, and he said that tetelestai. And when you put your faith in him, again, I just want to emphasize that you are stamped with that paid in full. It is done. It is finished. This one is mine. This one has been paid in full. There is no more debt in this person. And that's what he's saying. That's what we see in this. That's what we see in this picture of him. And I love that. And one of the things that happened there in this supernatural moment when Jesus was there, if you read this in the Gospels, it was this, and this is a very flawed picture of how that was, but it's when you talk about the temple and the Holy of Holies, and there was this veil. There was this very thick veil. It wasn't paper thin. It wasn't like just a regular curtain you have in your house. But it said, when he was up there, when he said, it is finished, this is what happened. It wasn't lightning striking. It wasn't a storm out there. It wasn't a cat jumped on it and ripped the curtains like we're thinking of something small. No, this is big. This is massive, and it's covering the Holy of Holies. And at that moment, when he was there, when he said, it is finished, and he died, it said the veil of the temple just tore in two supernaturally, just ripped. And I love that picture of how that happened. I think us, we can read this and we can say, okay, the veil, the temple kind of tore. It's cool. We see this picture, but I don't know. Maybe we just can't even picture how massive and enormous that was that happened. It tore. And remember what that means. When the priest went in there, nobody else could go in there. This is the presence of God. Nobody else. We're all there looking at this high priest, and it's like, man, he's going to go in there, and hopefully he's right with God, and he's going to offer these sacrifices. No, it's like it was torn in two. This is the difference. It was always pointing to this. It was like I said, painting this picture. I want you to understand how holy I am. I want you to understand what you've done. We got to understand that with our sin, and we've been messed up. We cannot save ourselves. And it's like this whole picture throughout this whole scripture is pointing out all this stuff. And he set up this temporary things that are like the real things. They're like the real heaven. They're like the real high priest. And they're pointing to Jesus. And now he finally did this. And he says, this is how it was. But he tears the veil and he says, now through Christ. That's the cool thing. If you don't understand it, now through Christ, it is different now. We can go straight to the Holy of Holies. We can go straight to God. We can pray to him through Christ. That's the massive thing. That's what I want us to understand. That's why I say Jesus is greater. And that's what I want us to understand as we're going to go through this series. And man, you guys go tell people. Go tell as many people as you possibly can. Tetelestai, it is finished. Jesus did it all. He did it all because he could do it all because he was in the authority of God. He's the Son of God. It is finished because Jesus is greater. That's what I want you guys to understand. You guys bow your head.